Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hello, Woo Crew, and welcome back to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I'm here with yet another solo episode. And this week's episode is going to be packed with lots of juicy goodness because today, the day this is airing, is March 17th, which most people will know is St. Patrick's Day, and I have some things to say about that. And, of course, we are also coming up to the Spring Equinox, which I may also refer to here as Ostara, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the different names by which this moment, this solar event in our calendar, goes by, the history there. And usually I wouldn't combine these two episodes, but I really wanted to talk about St. Patrick's Day. I don't know if you are watching this on video, but if you are, you might be able to see that I'm wearing snakes for my earrings today. That's very much on purpose as I record, and I will be also in the future for me as you're listening to this, definitely wearing the snakes on St. Patrick's Day as well. And I also didn't want to wait until after the equinox had passed to give you a little bit of information about this moment, this turn of the wheel of the year. And so it's all going to be in this episode together, along with a reminder that if you have not signed up for Bloom yet, you are still able to do so and join us on the journey, and you'll have access to all the replays. So if you've missed day one, or maybe you're listening to this later in the week and you've missed most of the week, never fear. You can still sign up and join us for this really powerful guided journey to connect with your inner power. All right, so let's start with St. Patrick's Day. I will be the first to admit that this is a fun day to celebrate because of the energies around it in our modern culture, right? It's a big deal in Ireland. There is a lot of partying that goes on. It's one of those interesting, it's a tiny country, Ireland, and yet this particular celebration is celebrated widely all over the place in the world. And it's actually a fun fact that there are more Irish folks living abroad than there are in Ireland. And so that's part of why, right? A lot of folks from Ireland emigrated over the years to different countries. They still do so. And they brought their culture and their traditions with them. And this one, I guess everybody likes a good excuse to get rip-roaring drunk once in a while and play a good Irish jig. And so it's really spread very far and wide. And yet, when we look at the history of this day, we're going to see why I now I'm not so keen on celebrating and why I'm wearing snakes in my ears. So we all know, or maybe you don't, but the traditional story of St. Patrick, which is what St. Patrick's Day is all about celebrating, is that he came to Ireland and drove the snakes out of Ireland, right? And we know for certain that this is symbolic because there were never actually any snakes in Ireland. Not exactly snake environment. Snakes don't do so well, except for water snakes, but not so good in cold, wet climates, right? They're reptiles. They like the sun. They like the dry. And we know that since the last ice age, there have not been snakes in Ireland. So this driving out of the snakes has always been symbolic, and it is relatively widely accepted that the symbolic piece here was actually that St. Patrick was driving out the indigenous pre-Christian spiritual traditions like the Druidic traditions and the goddess worshipping practices. And so we know from history and evidence, right, that snakes are often seen in goddess worship. And if we go back through archaeological artifacts and stuff all the way through like ancient civilization, coming out of the Middle East and the Near East at the very least, we see a lot of very obvious links and associations of the goddess with the serpent. We even think about, that Kundalini energy and how it is serpent-like. We have the image of the Ouroboros, even the serpent eating its own tail, and that kind of cyclical nature of birth, rebirth, and death, which again has been very commonly linked to the feminine powers of being able to create and give life. So there's definitely some really strong connections between serpents or snakes as a representation of the goddess or the feminine divinity. There's also some good evidence for snakes being a metaphor for the Druids in Celtic lands. When we talk about the Druids, so Druidic traditions are part of that ancient Celtic heritage. The Druids were the spiritual leaders of pre-Christian Celtic societies. They were deeply connected to nature. They held deep knowledge of astronomy, of herbalism, and spiritual rites. And interestingly, the term serpent was often used metaphorically for wisdom keepers and initiates in mystery traditions. And so this is something that the Christian world would have been aware of. And so this displacement of the Druids that happened, we credit it to St. Patrick. It was likely already in progress when he arrived in Ireland, and he's not single-handedly responsible for it. But again, the mythology that springs up around some of these figures, he is now credited solely for driving out these serpents. But the displacement of the Druids and the destruction of the sacred sites really align with this metaphor of the snakes being driven out. And so St. Patrick's Day is a patriarchal colonialist holiday. It's a celebration of patriarchy and suppression and colonization. And so that's why I no longer desire to celebrate. We know that in addition to the Druidic tradition, Ireland also had a really rich tradition and history of goddess veneration, including Bridget, who we've talked about here. We spoke about her extensively with Imbolc, and in a lot of ways, the spring equinox is like this height of the season of Imbolc. And so Bridget is very present with us at this moment, and I'll be speaking a little bit more to that as we go further into this episode. We've also got Eiru, the sovereignty goddess of Ireland, from whom the name Ireland derives, right? She was a goddess of the Tuatha Dé Danann, that mythical tribe of supernatural beings who are said to have occupied Ireland before humans even arrived there. We've got the Cailleach, who we've traveled with all winter. We've got Govnet of the bees and the smiths. There's so many beautiful, rich goddess traditions in Ireland, and a lot of them were folded into Christian tradition and they became saints. Again, Bridget's a beautiful example of this happening. And there is also this really sacred ancient practice of kingship and goddess sovereignty being really important partners in the governance of the land. We have so many myths coming out of Celtic lands and Ireland as well specifically, which describe the fact that the king needed to wed the goddess in order to be a sovereign of the land, in order to be a caretaker and to be a real true king. And so it's that marrying, that wedding of the divine feminine with the divine masculine. Again, not putting one above the other. It's this recognition that we need both. We need balance. So Many of the goddess traditions were really absorbed into Christian practices rather than being completely erased, but they were stripped of their original context. They were subordinated to Christian frameworks. Celtic Christianity actually is a fertile space for some, I want to say, rebellion almost against some of the more dogmatic teachings coming out of, say, Rome, for instance. There was still this really strong understanding in Celtic lands of the divinity of nature and the connection to nature, and the fact that we don't need human constructed buildings to be in connection with the divine or spirit. So there's some interesting things. We could go down a lot of rabbit holes in this. We're not going to in this moment. I am not prepared to. And we don't want this episode to get excessively long. Now, again, we've got this St. Patrick driving out the snakes, driving out the Druids and the goddess tradition. The process of Christianization in general, not just in Celtic lands, but all over, really went hand in hand with colonial expansion. The erasure of indigenous practices echoes the later kind of colonial projects that really sought to replace indigenous knowledge systems with a dominant religious and political structure. In my notes, I'm saying, indigenous Irish spiritual practices, but this tenet holds true wherever we've seen that colonization of this empire of Christianity. It happened in North America. It happened pretty much everywhere that the Christian nations tried or successfully colonized, took over, subordinated the indigenous wisdom traditions that were in and of that land before they arrived. And the British really did use St. Patrick's Day a little bit later on as this means of reinforcing Irish Catholic identity, but of course in a way that aligned Ireland with colonial Christianity rather than the older, more subversive spiritual roots, which I referenced, right? It was a bit of a not so under the thumb of the greater church for a very long time. And so for many modern pagans, Druids, any kind of person who's realigning with their Celtic roots, are now viewing this day, St. Patrick's Day, as a day to speak about these truths and to reclaim that symbol of the snake as representing those wisdom traditions that predated Christianity in Ireland. So I wear earrings to honor the wisdom, the resilience, the power of the old ways rather than the imposed narrative of their destruction. Will I go out for a pint of Guinness on St. Paddy's Day? Probably. And will I have fun? Yes. And will I wear my snakes? 100%. You better believe it. So I'm really curious if this is new information for you. Leave me a comment. Let me know if you knew this before, if you learned something. I'm always curious how these things land. I remember when I was first learning about this, and actually I think this is an important point, because often if we have a tradition or a belief or celebration that we hold, that we've enjoyed, when we learn something about it that makes us reconsider whether it's aligned with our values now, it can be really uncomfortable. The first year I learned about this, I was like, screw it, I'm still celebrating because this is a really fun day. And I didn't really want to think about or look at that history because I think it felt like a bit of a loss to me to lose this day that felt so connected. And it makes sense that I would have a connection with this super big Irish celebration. And the more I learn and the more I lean into the teachings and the knowings, there is that capacity for me to be like, okay, I hate that saying Happy St. Patrick's Day doesn't feel good to me anymore. And so it's almost like a part of your identity can shift when our really ingrained beliefs, views, values, understandings, concepts of the world are challenged. And so just offering a little bit of softness and compassion to yourself there too. And again, as I said, I'm going to probably go out and have a pint on St. Paddy's Day, and I'm going to be okay with that. And I'm also going to share about the history and the fact that there is other. Now we also have in Ireland, as I mentioned at Imbolc, we've got this celebration or this holiday to mark Imbolc, St. Bridget's Day, is now, thanks to the work of some patriotic Irish feminists has become a national holiday in Ireland, just like St. Patrick's, so that we're honoring and celebrating the divine feminine right alongside the divine masculine, because again, we need both. We really do. And okay, I'm going to take this moment to transition a little bit into, oh, this is actually beautiful. It's perfect. We're going to transition into spring equinox and a little bit about that. And it is a moment of balance, right? The equinox, equal night, means that the day and the night are equal. We have this in the autumn, we have this in the spring. Different energies, but both all about balance. Balance between the light and the dark, between the night and the day, between the feminine and the masculine. This recognition that we always need to return to equilibrium or to balance. And that balance doesn't mean static, because again, there's only this couple of days where we just pause. There's actually one moment where it's exactly the same, but there's a few days around the equinox where it really does feel like those days and nights are equal. And we have this moment of pause in perfect equilibrium, and then the scales tip again, but we're always returning, right? We're always returning to that balance. And so to me, this sense of honoring and having Imbolc, having St. Bridget's Day and the goddess Bridget, but St. Bridget's Day marked as a national holiday is like the tipping of that balance back towards perhaps finding some equilibrium. And if we look way back in history, there's certainly lots of evidence to show that at one point the balance was tipped way in the other direction, and goddess worship was the name of the game, and women were in charge. We were the rulers, we were the leaders. There was certainly some things in those matriarchal societies that were also not super pretty to look at. We have, male sacrifice, and so there's definitely some dark history on both sides. Again, it's all about balance, all about coming back and finding balance. And so the equinox is this beautiful moment of balance in our year. It is the culmination of spring energies. For those of us here in North America, we now mark it as the first day of spring, but in those Celtic traditions, it's really the middle point of spring. The apex, if you will, of spring, of the energies of Bridget, who returned to us at Imbolc, who is helping us to really light our creative fires, and we're throwing fuel on the flames at this point, which is really fitting as we also enter Aries season at this time. Spring is this time of clearing out the stagnant energies of winter, both physical and spiritual, and you might have been doing that already since we entered Imbolc. But again, if you haven't spent some time with some spring cleaning, this is really good energetic time to do so, especially in light of the eclipse that we just had, that there was some letting go. It's in the south node, so letting go of what is no longer serving us. It's also a time to begin to sow the seeds of intention for the spring and the summer coming forward, this time of new life coming into the world. And depending on where you are listening to this, there may already be lots of beautiful, fertile things growing, or you might just be starting to get the sense that there might be life coming up from below the ground. And again, it's really tuning into the wisdom of the season in the place you're in. And so I mentioned that I wanted to share a little bit about the name. So I'm veering back towards, or maybe for the first time for me, I am trying to get in the habit of calling the equinoxes and the solstices by those names. And I will use them interchangeably a little bit with the more modern pagan or Wiccan terms for these celebrations, simply because it's easier to say. So the spring or the vernal equinox is often called, in pagan traditions, it's called Ostara. And this name is not super new, and it's taken from an ancient spring goddess. So there is some reason to lend this name to this time. But again, because I personally am leaning into my Celtic heritage, and they did not use this name Ostara for this time of the year, though they did mark this time because it is, again, one of those solar events, those solar festivals. It would have been very important to any of our agricultural forebears. The name Ostara itself is one that I'm not going to be using as often. So the spring equinox occurs usually on March 20th or 21st, depending on the year. Again, it's considered to be the first day of spring in our modern calendar, and it does mark the astrological new year. So we do have that kind of fresh beginning, fresh start, fiery new energy, and it's all about balance, renewal, rebirth. As I mentioned, the name Ostara comes from an ancient goddess's name. She's a Germanic goddess, and she's connected with fertility, the triumph of spring over winter. She's also related to the Anglo-Saxon goddess Eostre, who is also a spring goddess associated with agriculture and the dawn. There is some debate over the origins of this goddess, with some speculation that she might be a newer invention, though she's mentioned in a text from the 8th century by the Venerable Bede, or Bede, I never know how to say his name. Regardless, it is a time of importance in many cultures around the world because agriculturally it is a moment in time, right? We could track the sun. Our ancestors knew that this moment was significant. So you might notice too, you might have made the connection that Ostara or Eostre sounds a whole heck of a lot like Easter. And it's interesting because some years Easter falls closer to or further from the equinox. This is one of those celebrations that was Christianized that doesn't actually stick to the original date or as close to the date that it would have been marked by the people who were originally celebrating. But there's some fun little crossovers in some of the legends here as to why we end up with egg-laying rabbits as part of our Easter traditions, right? And so there is a popular legend about Eostre, the Anglo-Saxon goddess, and her feast day was held on the full moon following the vernal equinox. So this is actually, now that I say all this date is actually the identical or very nearly identical calculation for Christian Easter in the West. So that is the connection there. And there's a legend about Eostre that she found a bird who was wounded on the ground in late winter. And to save its life, she transformed it into a hare. But the transformation was not complete. The bird took the appearance of a hare, but retained the ability to lay eggs. And the hare would decorate these eggs and leave them as gifts of thanks for saving its life to Eostre. And so this is likely where we get this tradition of painting eggs, where we end up with hares that lay eggs and the symbolism of hares and chicks and eggs and all of that with Easter. The Celtic peoples, as I said, we know they honored these solar events, and many of their holy places are built to line up with the sun on the equinox. Places like Loch Crew or Slabna Cailleach, which is the Cailleach's Hill in County Meath. It's a sacred center. And Slabna Cailleach has many megalithic mounds constructed 5,000 plus years ago. Originally, there were 50 to 100 mounds here, but a few still survive. 7 still capture solar events. And so one, for example, as the sun rises on the spring and the autumn equinoxes, Karen T captures the light in its belly. And so this can be described, as this dance between the masculine and the feminine energies as the sun penetrates into the passage of this ancient tomb womb of the Cailleach, and it comes into full illumination. So many beautiful little bits of knowledge or story or myth or history or understanding are woven into all these moments in our calendar year, in our astrological year, in the wheel as it turns. And these are the ones that I wanted to offer today for you to consider. And marking these moments, honoring these moments with ritual, with celebration, with ceremony. If you would like to join for our spring equinox ceremony, the link is live on my website. You could join us in ceremony on Friday, March 21st on the equinox, to sit in circle in sacred sisterhood with other women and mark this balance point of the year, mark the seasonal energies, the balance between the divine feminine, the divine masculine, That is open to everyone, no matter where you are. It is online and recorded in case you want to join the ceremony but aren't able to attend when we are live. So, offering you that there, whether or not you are able to join, as I mentioned, it's a really good time to cleanse your home or even get into some body, soul, mind cleansing, spring cleaning. Start taking action on the seeds of intention that you planted at Samhain, Yule, and Imbolc. It's a great time to journal about themes of fertility, rebirth, renewal, and celebrate the arrival of spring and the hope that comes with the new year. A couple of journaling questions for you. One to capture the essence of the feminine and one to capture the essence of the masculine that we have at this time of year. So I'm going to leave you with these two questions. You may want to jot them down. You might just come back and listen to the last few minutes of this podcast so that you can grab them for later. But the first question is, in the feminine, what am I devoting myself to? What am I devoting myself to? And in the masculine, what discipline does this require? What discipline does this require? Okay, I am wishing you all a delightful day. Wear your snakes, wear them proudly. Enjoy time with friends if you are celebrating. Don't beat yourself up for celebrating. Maybe you share a little story of the history of St. Patrick and other ways or things that we might decide to celebrate on this day, like the resilience of the goddess and of the divine feminine and of the Irish people. And blessed spring equinox to you. And I will see you again this time next week. Bye for now, Woo Crew. Thanks so much for being here.